There's something hauntingly powerful about standing in a place where time itself feels suspended, where the air hums with whispers of the past, and the weight of prophecy lingers like an unshakable presence. Picture this: you're deep inside an ancient oracle chamber, your fingers brushing against walls carved with symbols no one has fully deciphered, your footsteps echoing as if answering voices from centuries ago. These weren't just rooms, they were gateways, sacred spaces where kings and commoners alike sought answers from forces beyond human understanding, where the fate of empires hinged on a single cryptic phrase. And what's most astonishing, these oracle chambers weren't confined to one culture or corner of the world. From the misty hills of Greece to the sun-baked temples of Egypt, civilizations separated by oceans and millennia shared an unshakable belief in these portals to the divine. But here's the question that sends chills down the spine of every historian and seeker: how much of what unfolded in these chambers was prophecy, and how much was sheer human ingenuity? The priests and priestesses who delivered these messages, were they truly channeling the gods, or were they masters of psychology, reading the hopes and fears of those who came to them? The answers lie buried in the ruins of places like Delphi, where the Pythia sat atop a fissure in the earth, breathing in vapors said to connect her to Apollo himself. Or Dodona, where the rustling of oak leaves carried the will of Zeus. These sites weren't just backdrops for superstition, they were theaters of destiny, where every word spoken rippled across history. And that's exactly what we're about to explore together. This isn't just a tour of ancient ruins or a dry recounting of myths. It's a journey into the heart of one of humanity's most enduring mysteries, our relentless desire to pierce the veil of the unknown. As we walk through these hallowed halls, you'll discover how the prophecies of old weren't just about predicting the future. They were mirrors reflecting the deepest fears and aspirations of the people who sought them. You'll see how the echoes of these oracles still shape our world today, hidden in the symbols of art, the patterns of politics, even the stories we tell ourselves about fate and free will. So take a step closer, listen for the whispers in the shadows. The ancient oracle chambers are ready to speak again, and what they reveal might just change how you see the past, the future, and everything in between. If we want to understand why oracle chambers held such power over the ancient world, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a time when the line between earth and the divine wasn't just blurred, it was non-existent. The earliest oracle chambers weren't grand temples or carved stone sanctuaries. They were natural formations, caves where the earth itself seemed to breathe, springs where the water shimmered with an otherworldly glow, groves where the wind carried voices that weren't quite human. In Mesopotamia, the world's first known civilization, priests would descend into darkened chambers beneath ziggurats, interpreting the flicker of oil lamps and the patterns of smoke as messages from the gods. In Egypt, the rustle of papyrus in sacred libraries wasn't just wind, it was the voice of Thoth, the god of wisdom, whispering secrets to those who knew how to listen. But Greece took this idea and transformed it into something unforgettable. Delphi wasn't chosen at random. It was built where two eagles, released by Zeus from opposite ends of the world, were said to have met, the very center of the earth. And the Pythia, the woman who channeled Apollo's prophecies, didn't just offer vague predictions. Her words shaped wars, decided the fates of kings, and even determined where cities would rise. The secret, a combination of geology and theater. Beneath her seat ran a fissure emitting ethylene gas, a natural intoxicant that could induce trances. The priests of Delphi were masterful interpreters, turning her fragmented utterances into poetry that resonated with the deepest fears and desires of those who sought guidance. What's fascinating is how these chambers maintained their grip on the human imagination for centuries, even as empires rose and fell. It wasn't just about prophecy, it was about control, politics, and the universal hunger for certainty in an uncertain world. When Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia, asked Delphi if he should attack Persia, the oracle famously replied, "If you cross the river Holys, a great empire will fall." He did, and it was his own. Was this divine foresight or a clever play on words? The ambiguity was the point. Oracles weren't just passive conduits, they were active shapers of history, using their influence to steer the course of nations. And yet, their power wasn't limitless. The same civilizations that revered them also knew the risks of misplaced faith. In Dodona, priests would listen for the will of Zeus in the creaking of an ancient oak, but if the message seemed too dire, they'd wait for a second rustling, a divine correction. Even the Pythia only spoke on certain days, as if the gods themselves needed time to consider their words. This delicate balance between reverence and skepticism tells us something profound about the ancient world and about ourselves. We still seek answers from forces beyond our understanding, whether in algorithms, horoscopes, or the whispers of history. The oracle chambers may lie in ruins, but the questions they posed about fate, free will, and the nature of truth still echo in the human heart. The ancient architects who designed oracle chambers understood something profound. The divine wasn't just spoken, it was experienced. Every stone, every corridor, every carefully placed opening was a tool to heighten the senses and manipulate perception. Take the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Its inner sanctum, the Aditon, wasn't some grand, sunlit hall. It was a small, sunken chamber, dimly lit by flickering torches, where the Pythia sat atop a tripod above that fateful fissure. The low ceiling trapped the ethylene vapors, concentrating their effects, while the uneven acoustics made her voice echo strangely, as if it came from everywhere at once. Even the path leading to her wasn't straight. Pilgrims wound their way up the mountain, passing inscriptions and offerings, their anticipation building with every step, a psychological masterpiece centuries before the term existed. Then there's Dodona, where the oracle didn't rely on gases but on something equally ingenious, the language of nature. The sacred oak grove wasn't just a cluster of trees, it was a living instrument. Bronze vessels hung from the branches, catching the wind and amplifying its whispers into metallic sighs. Priests trained for years to interpret these sounds, turning the rustle of leaves and the clang of metal into divine pronouncements. The placement of the grove wasn't accidental either. Nestled in a valley where winds funneled through narrow passes, the site was a natural amplifier, ensuring the voice of Zeus was never drowned out. But perhaps the most striking feature of these chambers was their celestial alignment. The Egyptians took this to another level. At the Temple of Ammon in Siwa, the oracle chamber was positioned so that sunlight pierced its doorway only on the winter solstice, illuminating the statue of the god in a blaze of gold. This wasn't just symbolism, it was theater. Imagine being a supplicant standing in the gloom as the light suddenly revealed the deity, as if the heavens themselves had intervened. Even the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Mesoamerican pyramids served a purpose. The echoing footsteps of priests in the dark mimicked the voices of spirits, a trick of acoustics that convinced visitors they stood at the threshold of another world. What's remarkable is how these techniques transcended cultures. In China, the Shang dynasty's oracle bones were heated in chambers designed to control airflow, ensuring cracks formed in precise, readable patterns. The Romans built the Sibylline Books vault with porous stone, allowing distant sounds to filter through as murmurs of prophecy. These weren't crude attempts at mysticism. They were experiments in human psychology, environmental engineering, and even early neuroscience, all wrapped in the guise of the sacred. Today, we might call this immersive design. But for the ancients, it was something deeper, a bridge between the seen and unseen, where architecture didn't just house the divine, it became its voice. And that's the real revelation. These chambers weren't passive stages for superstition. They were active devices, fine-tuned to play on the deepest chords of human belief. The next time you hear an echo in a cathedral or feel a shiver in a dark hallway, remember the architects of the oracle chambers knew exactly what they were doing. And their secrets still resonate. The oracle wasn't just a messenger, she was a living conduit, a human instrument tuned to frequencies beyond ordinary perception. Picture her in the shadows of Delphi, draped in flowing robes, her breath heavy with the scent of bay leaves, her mind adrift in a haze of intoxicating vapors. The rituals surrounding these figures weren't mere ceremony. They were a carefully choreographed dance between the earthly and the divine. Before ascending the tripod, the Pythia submerged herself in the icy waters of the Castalian spring, a baptism meant to purify both body and spirit. She chewed laurel leaves not just for their association with Apollo, but because their bitter oils heightened her trance-like state. Every detail, from the timing of her prophecies only on the 7th day of the month, sacred to Apollo, to the way her words were translated into hexameter verse by attending priests, was designed to amplify her otherworldly authority. But the most striking aspect of these oracles wasn't their mysticism, it was their duality. They straddled two worlds, the spiritual and the political. When the Pythia warned Athens to trust in wooden walls before the Persian invasion, it wasn't just a riddle, it was strategic counsel. The Athenian general Themistocles interpreted it as a call to build a naval fleet, a decision that saved Greece. Similarly, the Sibyl of Cumae, whose prophecies guided Rome's destiny, wasn't just a recluse in her cave. She was a geopolitical player, her cryptic scrolls consulted before every major military campaign. These women wielded influence that kings envied, yet they lived as vessels, their identities erased behind the gods they channeled. What's often overlooked is the sheer physical toll of their calling. Ancient texts describe the Pythia convulsing, foaming at the mouth, her voice dropping to guttural tones as the god possessed her. Modern scholars suggest the ethylene gas from Delphi's fissures induced hallucinations, while the laurel's compounds may have triggered muscle spasms. But here's the paradox: even in altered states, their pronouncements carried uncanny precision. The Dodona oracle, who heard Zeus in the rustling oak, advised Odysseus on his journey home directions so accurate they've been mapped onto real Mediterranean sailing routes. Was this coincidence, or were these women tapping into something science still can't explain? Perhaps the answer lies in the training. Oracles weren't chosen at random. They were selected young, often from priestly families, and subjected to decades of mental and sensory conditioning. In Egypt, the god's wife of Ammon spent years memorizing celestial patterns, learning to read the stars as one might a scroll. In Mesopotamia, oracles fasted for days before rituals, their hunger sharpening their sensitivity to subtle cues, the way smoke curled, the pitch of a dying flame. These weren't passive mediums, they were elite interpreters, their minds honed to detect patterns invisible to others. And then there's the most haunting question of all: did they believe their own prophecies? Accounts describe the Pythia weeping after particularly grim visions, her body racked with exhaustion. The Sibyl of Cumae was said to age centuries in moments, her voice cracking under the weight of foresight. Whether their power came from the divine, the psychological, or some alchemy of both, one thing is certain: these women paid a price for their gifts. Their legacy isn't just in the wars they started or the kings they counseled, It's in the timeless human yearning to glimpse beyond the veil, to find meaning in the chaos. And that's a thread that stretches unbroken from Delphi's ruins to the algorithms predicting our futures today. The language of prophecy was a masterclass in ambiguity, a delicate balance between revelation and concealment that kept seekers hanging on every word. Think of it like a cosmic game of telephone, where the gods whispered in metaphors and mortals strained to decode the message. When the Pythia told Croesus that crossing the Halys River would destroy a great empire, she didn't specify which empire. The brilliance of this vagueness wasn't just about protecting the oracle's reputation. It was about giving the prophecy room to breathe, to adapt to whatever fate unfolded. If Croesus won, the oracle was right. If he lost, the prophecy still held. This wasn't deception, it was survival. In a world where kings demanded certainty but the future refused to cooperate, ambiguity became the ultimate shield. But how did ancient societies untangle these riddles? The answer lies in the priesthoods, the unsung linguists of the divine. At Delphi, the Pythia's raw, often disjointed utterances were reshaped by priests into polished hexameter verse, a process akin to translating chaos into poetry. These interpreters weren't just scribes, they were cultural codebreakers steeped in the symbolism of their time. A mention of eagles clashing might signal war to a Spartan but a trade dispute to a Corinthian. The vagueness wasn't a flaw, it was a feature, allowing the same prophecy to speak to different people in different ways. The trust in these cryptic messages ran deeper than blind faith. Oracles thrived on a kind of communal psychology. When a prophecy came true, it was often because the listeners made it true. Take the famous wooden walls warning to Athens. The oracle didn't command them to build ships, it offered an image open to interpretation. Themistocles' decision to see it as a naval strategy wasn't just clever, it was collaborative, a dialogue between divine hint and human ingenuity. This interplay gave prophecies their staying power. A clear prediction could be disproven, but a riddle, it lived on, endlessly reinterpreted, its meaning evolving with the times. And that's the real revelation. The language of prophecy wasn't meant to predict the future, it was meant to shape it. By wrapping truth in metaphor, oracles gave people the tools to navigate uncertainty without stripping away their agency. Even today, we see echoes of this in horoscopes or political forecasts, where vague statements feel eerily personal. The ancient world understood something we often forget. Certainty is fragile, but mystery. Mystery endures. Delphi may have been the star of the ancient oracle world, but it wasn't the only stage where the divine and human realms collided with such theatrical force. Just imagine the sheer diversity of these sacred spaces, each one a fingerprint of the culture that birthed it, each with rituals so distinct they feel like pieces of a grand, interconnected puzzle. Take the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, hidden deep in Egypt's western desert. Unlike Delphi's misty mountains, this was a sun-scorched sanctuary where pilgrims crossed endless dunes to reach its gleaming temple. Here, the god spoke not through a trembling priestess, but through the motion of a sacred boat carried by priests. The slightest tilt or sway was interpreted as divine guidance, a method so precise it dictated everything from harvest dates to royal coronations. What made Siwa extraordinary wasn't just its isolation, it was the way it mirrored Egypt's obsession with cosmic order. Every movement of that boat echoed the journey of Ra's solar bark across the sky, tying earthly decisions to celestial rhythms. Then there were the Sibylline caves of Italy, where prophecy took on a darker, more literary form. Unlike the spontaneous utterances of Delphi, the Sibyl's prophecies were meticulously recorded on palm leaves and stored in Rome's underground vaults. These weren't vague riddles but sprawling, apocalyptic visions verse after verse warning of fires, plagues, and the fall of empires. When Rome faced crisis, senators would descend into the cavernous archives, sifting through these ancient texts for passages that seemed to fit the moment. It was less about predicting the future and more about reframing the present, using the weight of antiquity to legitimize political decisions. The genius of the Sibyl. Her words were never static. Leaves could be lost, new verses discovered, allowing the prophecies to evolve alongside Rome itself. But perhaps no oracle chamber was as visceral as the oracle of Trophonius in Greece. Here, seekers didn't simply listen, they endured. After days of purification, they'd descend a ladder into a pitch-black pit, their feet touching a narrow ledge before being sucked into a subterranean current. Ancient accounts describe hallucinations of swirling lights, disembodied voices, and the sensation of being pulled apart. When they emerged, trembling and often unable to speak, priests would interpret their ravings as divine messages. This wasn't prophecy as performance, it was prophecy as ordeal, a trial by terror designed to strip away ego and leave only raw revelation. And then there's the Egyptian oracle of the dead, a stark contrast to Trophonius' brutality. At sites like the Temple of Hathor, seekers would sleep in underground chambers, their dreams believed to be messages from departed souls. The walls were painted with scenes of the afterlife, not to frighten but to guide the dreamer's journey. It was a gentler form of divination, one that reflected Egypt's intimate relationship with death as just another realm to navigate. What ties these chambers together isn't just their purpose, it's how perfectly each was tailored to its culture's psyche. Delphi thrived on ambiguity because Greece valued debate. Siwa's precision mirrored Egypt's bureaucratic divinity. The Sibyl's archives suited Rome's love of precedent, while Trophonius' trials appealed to Greece's fascination with personal transformation. These weren't random traditions, they were mirrors held up to the societies that created them, reflecting their deepest values back in the language of the sacred. And that's the real magic, how a single human longing, the need to touch the divine, could take so many breathtaking forms. The crack in the earth beneath Delphi, I wasn't just a geological quirk, it was the engine of prophecy. Modern researchers drilling into the temple's foundations made a startling discovery: traces of ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas that, in low doses, induces euphoria and trance-like states. In higher concentrations, hallucinations, slurred speech, even convulsions, precisely the symptoms ancient texts describe in the Pythia. Suddenly, her writhing and cryptic utterings take on a new light. But here's where it gets fascinating. Ethylene doesn't just distort perception, it amplifies emotion, making the mind hyper-receptive to suggestion. Picture the scene: a pilgrim, desperate for guidance, breathing in the same vapors as the Pythia, their shared altered state turning every vague phrase into a thunderous revelation. Science isn't debunking the oracle, it's revealing how meticulously the ancient world weaponized the human brain's vulnerability to awe. Yet Delphi was just one piece of the puzzle. Across the Aegean, the oracle of Dodona's sacred oak stood atop intersecting groundwater streams, their electromagnetic fields potentially disrupting brain waves in ways modern studies link to heightened suggestibility. In Mexico, the Maya inhaled vapors from hallucinogenic mushrooms in steam-filled sweat lodges, their visions later etched into temple walls as divine messages. Even the Bible story of Ezekiel's wheeled angels now reads like a textbook case of entoptic phenomena, the geometric hallucinations triggered by flickering light or oxygen deprivation. These weren't random acts of mysticism, they were repeatable experiments in consciousness honed over centuries, but dismissing these visions as mere chemistry misses the point. Modern neurology shows that altered states don't just create fantasies, they strip away the brain's usual filters, allowing subconscious knowledge to surface. The Pythia, raised in Delphi's priesthood, would have absorbed geopolitical tensions like a sponge. Her gas-induced utterances might have been the ancient equivalent of data mining, her fragmented phrases pieced together by priests trained to spot patterns in chaos. When she warned Sparta of a king's death-bringing ruin, she wasn't foreseeing the future, she was vocalizing the instability any observer could sense brewing. The real revelation, these chambers were early laboratories of the mind. The Sibyl's Cave, with its echoing whispers, exploited auditory pareidolia, the instinct to hear voices in noise. Trophonius's ordeal leveraged the brain's response to sensory deprivation, where darkness and isolation trigger vivid visions. Even the trembling of Ammon's sacred bark may have been a masterclass in subconscious influence, the priest's slight muscle tremors guided by collective expectation. What we call divine possession might simply have been humanity's first attempts to hack consciousness, using environmental cues as psychic triggers. So where does that leave us? The ancient world didn't have fMRI machines, but they didn't need them. They understood something we're only now rediscovering. The mind is the ultimate oracle, and reality is far more malleable than it seems. Whether through gases, vibrations, or psychological conditioning, these chambers weren't just portals to the gods. They were mirrors, reflecting the untapped potential of the human brain to reshape its own truth. And that's a prophecy still unfolding. The whispers of the oracle carried more weight than the edicts of kings because in the ancient world, divine approval was the ultimate political currency. When Croesus sent lavish gifts to Delphi before attacking Persia, he wasn't just seeking guidance, he was buying legitimacy. A favorable prophecy could rally armies, silence rivals, and cement a ruler's claim to power. But the relationship between oracles and rulers was never one-sided. The Pythia's famous ambiguity wasn't just mystical, it was diplomatic. By delivering prophecies that could bend with circumstance, she ensured Delphi remained indispensable to every faction. Sparta might hear a call to arms in her words, while Athens found a plea for caution. This wasn't fortune-telling, it was statecraft draped in divine mystery. Consider Alexander the Great's pilgrimage to Siwa. His journey across the desert wasn't about curiosity, it was a calculated power play. By having the oracle of Ammon confirm his lineage as the son of Zeus, Alexander didn't just bolster his image, he weaponized it. The Egyptians, Persians, and Greeks all revered Ammon, making his endorsement a universal stamp of authority. But here's what's often overlooked: the oracle's priests were just as savvy. Recognizing Alexander's potential, they transformed a ritual into a coronation, proving how oracles didn't just serve power, they curated it. Yet the true test of an oracle's influence came not in victories but in failures. When the Pythia wrongly predicted a Persian triumph over Greece, Delphi didn't collapse, it adapted. The priests reframed the prophecy, arguing the gods had sent a test of faith. This flexibility reveals the genius of the system. Prophecies weren't facts but narratives, open to reinterpretation as politics demanded. Even Rome, skeptical of mysticism, kept the Sibylline books locked in the capital, consulting them only when tradition required a divine alibi for unpopular decisions. The lesson: oracles thrived because they understood a timeless truth. People crave certainty, but power thrives on ambiguity. Whether in the marble halls of Delphi or the war rooms of modern governments, the dance between prophecy and politics continues, proof that some human games never change. The fading of the oracle chambers wasn't a sudden collapse but a slow unraveling, thread by thread, as the world's spiritual tapestry rewoven itself. By the time Christianity ascended across the Roman Empire, the once bustling sanctuaries of Delphi and Dodona stood like relics of a fading dream. The new faith didn't just dismiss the old gods, it actively dismantled their channels. Churches rose over pagan temples, their foundations literally burying the fissures and springs that had pulsed with prophecy. At Delphi, the Pythia's sacred tripod was carted off by Emperor Theodosius as spoils of spiritual conquest, while the Sibylline books, Rome's ancient prophetic scrolls, were burned in public squares as heresy. But the silencing of the oracles wasn't just about religious rivalry. It reflected a deeper shift in how humanity sought answers, no longer through ambiguous whispers, but through the rigid certainty of scripture and dogma. Yet nature itself seemed to conspire against these ancient sites. Earthquakes shattered Delphi's hallowed halls, collapsing the Aditon where the Pythia had breathed her vapors. The sacred oak of Dodona was struck by lightning, its charred trunk a stark metaphor for the end of an era. Even the oracle of Ammon at Siwa, which had survived Alexander's conquests, succumbed to desert sands, its once gleaming stones swallowed by dunes. These weren't just random disasters, they were poetic undoing, as if the earth itself was reclaiming its secrets. But here's the paradox: while the chambers crumbled, their essence refused to die. Medieval Europe's seers and mystics, though cloaked in Christian imagery, echoed the oracle's methods. The Völva of Norse sagas, crouched in smoke-filled tents, channeled visions much like the Pythia. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, described divine messages in trance states eerily reminiscent of Delphi's gas-induced prophecies. Even the Renaissance's obsession with astrology and alchemy was a secularized version of the old longing to decode the universe's hidden patterns. What truly survived, though, wasn't just the mechanics of divination but its purpose. The oracles had thrived on humanity's hunger for meaning in chaos, and that hunger never vanished. When the church condemned fortune-telling, people simply rebranded it. Saints' visions replaced sibyls, holy relics became the new conduits to the divine. The rituals changed, but the yearning remained. Today, we see it in the algorithms predicting our choices, the tarot readers on street corners, even the way we dissect celebrity psychics on late-night TV. The oracle chambers may lie in ruins, but their legacy is etched into something far more enduring. The human psyche's unshakable belief that the future isn't just random, it's waiting to be read. Ancient prophecies never really vanished, they just learned to speak in new dialects. Across modern universities and online forums, scholars are peeling back the layers of these cryptic messages, not as superstitious relics, but as complex artifacts of human thought. Take the famous Delphic maxim, "Know thyself." Once carved into the temple's forecourt, it's now dissected in psychology lectures as a precursor to modern self-awareness theories. The same words that guided pilgrims 2,000 years ago resonate in TED Talks and mindfulness apps, proving these prophecies weren't just about the future, they were about timeless human truths. Astronomers have joined the conversation too, re-examining prophecies through the lens of celestial events. The Pythia's warning of fire falling from the sky before the Persian Wars. Some researchers suggest it might describe a meteor shower visible over Greece that year, an event ancient observers would interpret as divine wrath. Similarly, the Sibyl's visions of rivers burning align with historical records of volcanic eruptions that reddened Mediterranean skies. This isn't about proving the oracles right, but recognizing how they wove real phenomena into their symbolic language, transforming natural occurrences into narratives of fate. Yet the most striking reinterpretations come from neuroscience. The Pythia's trances, once dismissed as myth, now find parallels in studies on altered states of consciousness. Brain scans of modern mediums and meditators show similar patterns to those described in ancient texts: hyperconnectivity between brain regions that blur the line between self and other. It's as if science is catching up to what the oracles knew instinctively. The human mind, under certain conditions, can access modes of perception that defy ordinary logic. Meanwhile, the resurgence of divination, from tarot readings to AI-powered astrology apps, reveals something deeper. In an age of algorithms, we haven't outgrown the need for symbolic guidance. The tools have changed, but the impulse remains identical: the craving for a framework to make sense of life's chaos. When a millennial draws a tarot card or a CEO consults a future trends report, they're participating in the same ritual as Croesus weighing Delphi's words, just with different props. So are these ancient prophecies still relevant? The answer lies not in their literal accuracy, but in their enduring power to mirror our deepest questions. They remind us that every generation seeks its own oracle, whether in temple ruins, star charts, or lines of code. The medium evolves, but the message, the human yearning to glimpse beyond the horizon, stays eternal. Archaeologists brushing dust from a freshly unearthed tablet at Dodona aren't just uncovering artifacts, they're intercepting whispers across millennia. These lead strips, etched with questions folded tightly to conceal their contents from prying eyes, form the closest thing we have to an ancient inbox. One pleads, "Should I sail to Sicily for trade?" Another, heartbreaking in its universality, asks, "Is the child I carry truly my husband's?" These aren't the grand queries of kings, but the raw, intimate fears of ordinary people, preserved in metal like insects in amber. What makes these discoveries revolutionary isn't just their age, it's their humanity. They reveal how oracle chambers functioned as the ancient world's therapists, lawyers, and business consultants all in one, their walls echoing with the same anxieties we voice today, just wrapped in different rituals. But the real breakthroughs are happening beneath the surface, literally. Ground-penetrating radar has peeled back layers of soil at Delphi like the pages of a buried manuscript, revealing networks of underground channels that may have funneled ethylene gas to multiple chambers, not just the Pythia's famed Aditon. This suggests prophecy wasn't a solo performance but an orchestrated production, with secondary oracles perhaps prepping supplicants before they reached the main event. At Siwa, thermal imaging has detected anomalies in the temple walls, hollow spaces that could be resonance chambers, designed to amplify the god's voice during sacred boat ceremonies. Even the seemingly random placement of Dodona's bronze vessels now appears calculated. 3D acoustic modeling shows they created specific sound frequencies when struck by wind, turning the grove into a colossal wind chime attuned to spiritual communication. Then there are the objects that defy easy explanation. A cache found near the Temple of Trophonius contained dozens of identical ceramic discs, each incised with a single eye. Were these left by seekers who'd survived the oracle's terrifying underground trial, symbols of visions seen in the dark? At Delphi, excavators uncovered a trove of miniature silver ships, votive offerings from sailors who'd heeded the Pythia's warnings and lived to give thanks. Most haunting are the oracle bones of Mesoamerica, notched with markings that mirror the cracking patterns seen in Chinese Shang dynasty divination rituals, hinting at a shared language of prophecy spanning continents. What's emerging from these fragments is a radical rethinking of how oracle chambers operated. They weren't just spiritual hubs but early data centers, collecting and processing information from across the ancient world. The lead tablets at Dodona show priests categorizing questions by theme, suggesting responses may have been archived for reference. At Claros in Turkey, excavations revealed a library adjacent to the oracle's chamber. its walls lined with niches for scrolls, likely records of past prophecies used to spot patterns in political unrest or crop failures. This transforms our image of oracles from passive conduits into active analysts, their pronouncements informed by centuries of carefully curated institutional knowledge. The most tantalizing discoveries, though, may still lie ahead. Multispectral imaging has detected faint inscriptions beneath the visible text on several tablets, like palimpsests of the divine. At Siwa, radar suggests an entire underground complex beneath the known ruins, its layout mirroring the constellations important to Ammon's cult. And in a quiet corner of Delphi's museum, a recently deciphered clay fragment mentions a second tripod, sparking debates about whether there were multiple Pythias operating simultaneously. Each revelation chips away at the boundary between history and myth, proving that even in our age of satellites and algorithms, the oracle chambers still have secrets to surrender if we know how to listen. The shadow of the oracle stretches far beyond crumbling temple walls. It flickers in the neon glow of movie screens, whispers in the pages of bestsellers, even hums in the algorithms that claim to predict our next online purchase. Take Shakespeare's Macbeth, where the three witches aren't just plot devices. They're pure Delphic theater, their cauldron bubbling with the same calculated ambiguity as the Pythia's vapors. Fair is foul and foul is fair could have been lifted straight from a lead tablet at Dodona, its meaning twisting like a snake in the listener's grasp. Fast forward to the Matrix's oracle, lounging in her kitchen with the casual authority of a modern Pythia. Her words, "You didn't come here to make the choice, you've already made it," echoing the ancient trick of making seekers realize they knew the answer all along. These aren't random homages, they're proof that the oracle's greatest prophecy was her own immortality. But the legacy runs deeper than pop culture. Modern conspiracy theories, from Nostradamus' predictions to QAnon's cryptic drops, mirror the ancient hunger for hidden knowledge, where vague phrases become Rorschach tests for collective anxiety. TikTok tarot readers and AI horoscopes, they're just Silicon Age sibyls trading palm leaves for push notifications. Even the language of modern finance feels Delphic when analysts speak of market corrections and bullish signals, their jargon as opaque as any priest's hexameter. The mediums have changed, but the mechanism remains eerily identical. Humans will always crave intermediaries to translate chaos into meaning. Art galleries tell the same story. John William Waterhouse's painting The Oracle shows a veiled priestess clutching her temples, her eyes rolled back in ecstasy, a pose modern neuroscientists recognize as classic temporal lobe seizure symptoms. Contemporary installations like Janet Cardiff's The 40-Part Motet recreate the eerie acoustics of oracle chambers, proving artists still chase that liminal space between sound and revelation. And what are Marvel's Doctor Strange or Dune's Bene Gesserit if not high-tech priestesshoods, their prophecies wrapped in sci-fi robes instead of laurel leaves? Perhaps most telling is how oracles have infiltrated our personal rituals. The Magic 8 ball on your desk, a toy version of the knucklebones once tossed by Roman augurs. That friend who insists their fortune cookie totally predicted their job offer. They're channeling the same cognitive bias that made Croesus hear victory in Delphi's riddle. Even therapy sessions borrow the oracle's toolkit, the therapist as neutral interpreter, the patient's own words reflected back in ways that reveal hidden truths. The through line is undeniable. Whether through sacred caves or smartphone apps, humans keep rebuilding the oracle chamber in every era. It's not about superstition, it's about our brains being wired to seek patterns, to crave narratives in the noise. The Pythia would have understood Instagram influencers perfectly. Both trade in the currency of mystery and desire. So the next time you chuckle at a horoscope or shiver at a film prophecy, remember, you're not just being entertained. You're participating in a tradition as old as civilization itself, one that proves the most enduring prophecies aren't about the future at all. They're about the timeless human need to believe that someone, somewhere, holds the key to what comes next. The image of the oracle as an all-knowing seer, eyes rolled back in divine ecstasy, is a myth that crumbles under historical scrutiny. These weren't infallible crystal balls, but institutions human, fallible, and deeply embedded in the messy realities of their time. Take the infamous case of the Spartan king Cleomenes, who allegedly bribed the Pythia to declare his rival unfit to rule. The scandal didn't discredit Delphi. It revealed the open secret that oracles were part of a larger ecosystem of power. Pilgrims didn't just bring questions to these chambers, they brought gold, political alliances, and the unspoken expectation that the gods would side with the highest bidder. Yet calling this mere fraud misses the point. The priests who interpreted the Pythia's ramblings weren't con artists. They were masterful diplomats, balancing divine authority with realpolitik. Archaeology offers startling proof of this duality. At Dodona, excavations uncovered lead tablets where questions were sometimes rewritten erasures, and edits suggesting answers were massaged to suit changing circumstances. One tablet initially asked whether a man should marry his current lover, but the final version inquires about a different woman entirely. Was this divine correction or human discretion? Even the mechanics of prophecy hint at calculated theater. The Pythia's famed ethylene vapors didn't induce random babble. At low doses, they heightened suggestibility, making her receptive to cues from priests who'd pre-screened supplicants. This wasn't deception, it was crowd control, a way to manage the deluge of desperate seekers without collapsing under their demands. But the most compelling evidence comes from the prophecies themselves. When the Pythia warned Athens to trust in wooden walls, the city's leaders debated whether it meant literal fortifications or a naval fleet. The correct interpretation emerged only after Themistocles, a pro-Navy politician, successfully argued his case. The prophecy didn't predict the future. It was a Rorschach test, its meaning shaped by whoever had the most convincing spin. Similarly, Rome's Sibylline books contained such vague poetry that senators could cherry-pick lines to justify anything from tax reforms to military campaigns. The genius of these systems wasn't in their accuracy but in their flexibility, allowing communities to reach consensus under the guise of divine will. Yet dismissing all oracles as clever charades overlooks their psychological brilliance. In a world without newspapers or scientific forecasts, these chambers functioned as ancient therapy sessions. A farmer asking whether to plant barley or wheat wasn't just seeking agricultural advice, he was outsourcing the paralyzing weight of decision-making. The act of journeying to a sacred site, undergoing purification rituals, and hearing a priest's solemn pronouncement provided something modern science confirms: ritual reduces anxiety. The real magic wasn't in the answers but in the ritualized process of seeking them, a structured way to confront life's terrifying uncertainties. So were the oracles frauds or visionaries? The answer lies somewhere in between. Like modern pollsters who shape public opinion even as they measure it, these ancient institutions didn't just reveal the future, they helped create it. Their power sprang not from supernatural insight but from an uncanny understanding of human nature, our need for authority, our terror of randomness, and our endless capacity to find patterns in chaos. That's a prophecy that still holds true today. The human mind is a pattern-seeking machine, wired to find meaning even in randomness, and the ancient oracles knew exactly how to exploit this. When the Pythia told a farmer his crops would fail unless he made a sacrifice, Her prophecy wasn't just a prediction, it was a psychological trap. If his fields thrived, the gods were appeased. If they withered, he hadn't given enough. This lose-lose logic, now recognized as confirmation bias, ensured prophecies could never truly fail. But the real genius lay in their vagueness. Like a horoscope that claims, a new opportunity will arise, oracle pronouncements were masterclasses in the Barnum effect, the tendency to accept vague statements as deeply personal truths. A phrase like "beware the stranger with two faces" could send a merchant scrutinizing business partners, a soldier suspecting his ally, or a wife side-eyeing her neighbor. The prophecy didn't specify, it simply held up a mirror to the listener's existing fears. Ritual amplified this effect exponentially. Imagine arriving at Delphi after days of arduous travel, your body weakened by fasting, your mind clouded by the scent of burning laurel and the drone of chanting priests. By the time you reached the Pythia's chamber, your critical faculties were already submerged. Modern psychology calls this sensory overload, a state where the brain, bombarded by stimuli, becomes hyper-receptive to suggestion. The trembling hands, the echoing whispers, even the taste of sacred spring water in your mouth, every detail conspired to make the ordinary feel supernatural. It's no coincidence that oracles often operated in dim, cavernous spaces. Darkness doesn't just conceal, it magnifies. A flickering shadow becomes a specter, a rustle of fabric transforms into a divine whisper. Yet the deepest power of prophecy lay in its ability to tame chaos. Before meteorology, a failed harvest could only be explained as divine wrath. Before psychology, a king's sudden madness was the work of vengeful spirits. Oracles didn't just predict events, they provided narratives, turning senseless tragedy into something with purpose and structure. When plague struck Athens, the Pythia didn't say, "germs spread in crowded cities." She blamed a forgotten crime against Apollo, giving the suffering a roadmap: purify the city, restore the gods' honor, and order would return. This wasn't primitive ignorance, it was crisis management. In a world without scientific frameworks, prophecy was the original algorithm, offering the illusion of control over life's terrifying unpredictability. What's startling is how little has changed. Swap the Pythia for a modern influencer promising, "The universe will provide if you manifest correctly," and the mechanism is identical. We still crave certainty, still mold vague advice to fit our circumstances, still pay premium prices for the illusion of control. The rituals just look different now: therapy sessions instead of sacrifices, data analytics instead of entrail reading. The oracle chambers may lie in ruins, but the human longing they exploited remains as potent as ever. Perhaps the greatest prophecy of all was the unspoken one, that no matter how advanced we become, we'll always need someone or something to tell us what comes next. The thread of prophecy winds through every culture like a golden cord connecting humanity across time and geography, proof that the need to hear the divine isn't bound by borders. While Delphi's vapors and Dodona's whispering oaks might be the most famous, step into the misty groves of Celtic Britain, and you'd find druids slicing mistletoe with golden sickles, interpreting its fall as messages from the gods. The Norse had their Völvers, seeresses who sat on high platforms, their staffs tapping out rhythms as they chewed hallucinogenic herbs to summon visions of Ragnarök. In China, Shang dynasty diviners scorched turtle shells with hot rods, reading the cracks like a celestial Morse code. The methods were as varied as the landscapes, yet beneath the surface, the same yearning pulsed in every heart to touch the invisible hand guiding fate. Take the Aztecs, who called their oracles Tlenemacazc, those who give things. These weren't passive mediums but active participants in cosmic dialogue. During ceremonies, they consumed Tiananacatl, sacred mushrooms that dissolved the veil between worlds, their resulting visions transcribed into colorful codices. Half a world away, Tibetan oracles achieved similar ends without substances. The Nechung oracle, still active today, enters a trance so profound his body contorts under the weight of the deity Pehar, his voice dropping octaves as he delivers prophecies. The contrast is striking. One culture alters chemistry to reach the divine, the other bends the body itself into a vessel. Yet both operate on the same principle, that truth lies just beyond ordinary perception, waiting to be accessed through ritualized rupture. Even the tools of divination reveal uncanny parallels. The Yoruba of West Africa cast opal chains, interpreting how the links fall, a method nearly identical to the ancient Roman practice of throwing astragaloi or knucklebones. The Maya peered into obsidian mirrors, much like the scryers of medieval Europe who gazed into polished crystal. And consider the eerie similarity between the Greek kledonomancy, listening for omens in chance remarks, and the Japanese practice of kotodama, where spoken words are believed to manifest reality. These echoes suggest something profound, that the human mind, when faced with life's chaos, tends to devise similar strategies to impose order, regardless of epoch or latitude. But here's what's truly revelatory. While the mechanisms differed, the social role of oracles was strikingly consistent. Whether in the court of a Chinese emperor or a Viking chieftain, these figures occupied a unique space: part advisor, part psychologist, part political wildcard. The Celtic Druids were known to halt battles with a single pronouncement, much like the Pythia's words could stall Greek wars. The Babylonian Baru priests, reading animal livers, held sway over kings because their divine interpretations often reflected hard truths everyone else was too afraid to voice. This universality hints at a deeper truth. Oracles didn't just predict the future, they mediated power, offering societies a way to make unbearable decisions bearable by framing them as divine will. So what do these global threads tell us? That the oracle chambers of the world were less about magic than about human nature's constants. Our terror of uncertainty, our hunger for meaning, our unshakable belief that if we listen closely enough, the universe might just whisper back. The languages changed, the rituals varied, but the question remained the same: what comes next? And in that question, spanning continents and millennia, lies the real prophecy, one that foretold not the future of nations, but the endless, unifying ache of the human spirit. The power to shape destiny carries an invisible weight, the burden of conscience. Ancient oracles stood at the crossroads of morality and influence, their words capable of launching fleets or toppling kings with a single ambiguous phrase. Consider the chilling case of the Syracusan general who consulted Delphi before invading Sicily. The Pythia's response, "You will destroy a great empire," became his rallying cry, only for his own forces to be annihilated in the campaign. Was this divine justice or a tragic misinterpretation? The ethical tightrope becomes even more harrowing when examining how oracles legitimized oppression. Spartan rulers frequently invoked Apollo's authority to justify their brutal helot system, claiming the god himself had decreed their supremacy. Yet temple records show these same rulers made lavish donations to Delphi just before such pronouncements. Coincidence or celestial bribery, but painting all divination as manipulation ignores its role as a check on power. When the Roman Senate pressured the Sibylline books to endorse an unpopular war, priests famously lost the relevant scrolls, a quiet act of resistance disguised as divine intervention. In Egypt, the Oracle of Ammon once refused to crown a pharaoh's chosen successor, instead selecting a minor prince who later ushered in a golden age of reform. These instances reveal a more complex truth. Oracle chambers weren't just tools of the powerful, they were sometimes the last refuge for voices the powerful couldn't silence. The moral ambiguity sharpens when we examine the psychology behind prophecy. Modern behavioral science shows that ambiguous predictions create a phenomenon called post hoc reframing, where listeners retroactively fit events to match the prophecy. Ancient priests may not have understood cognitive bias, but they mastered its effects. By phrasing warnings as riddles, "Beware the hour when eagles drink from fountains," they ensured prophecies could be reinterpreted to match outcomes. This wasn't necessarily deception, it was survival. In a world where kings executed messengers bearing bad news, vagueness became a lifeline for truth-tellers. Today's parallel dilemmas expose how little has changed. Social media algorithms that predict our behavior, pundits who claim absolute certainty about global events, even medical diagnoses delivered without nuance, all echo the oracle's ancient predicament. When a weather forecaster hedges predictions with % chance of rain, they're employing the same protective ambiguity as the Pythia. The core question remains, does anyone who interprets uncertainty, whether priest, politician, or AI, have an obligation to admit the limits of their foresight? Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the oracle chambers themselves. At Dodona, archaeologists found tablets where seekers had scratched out original questions and rewritten them, not to manipulate answers, but because the act of framing their dilemma revealed solutions they already knew. This hints at prophecy's deepest ethical purpose, not to predict the future, but to help us confront the present. The true moral test wasn't whether the gods spoke through these chambers, but whether those who listened came away wiser than they arrived. Beneath the olive groves of Epirus, hidden somewhere along the Akron River, lies one of antiquity's most tantalizing enigmas, the Oracle of the Dead. Herodotus wrote of a cavern where souls were summoned from the underworld, where seekers slept on animal skins and awoke with visions of departed loved ones whispering truths. Yet despite centuries of searching, no shovel or satellite has pinpointed its exact location. The same mystery cloaks the chamber of the Sibyl in Cumae, where Rome's legendary prophetess was said to inscribe her visions on oak leaves, arranging them in wind-scattered puzzles for visitors to decipher. These lost chambers aren't just archaeological blanks, they're ghost stories etched into history, their absence as compelling as their lore. Modern technology has revolutionized the hunt, but some secrets resist even the most advanced tools. Ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR mapping have peeled back layers of soil in Epirus, revealing subterranean tunnels that match ancient descriptions. Yet the fabled oracle chamber remains just out of reach. At Cumae, thermal imaging detected anomalies in the volcanic rock, but erosion and earthquakes have reshaped the cliffs so drastically that the Sibyl's cave, if it exists, may now be sealed behind collapses or submerged by rising groundwater. The irony is poetic. The very forces that preserve these sites, Earth shifts, nature's reclamation, also conspire to keep them hidden. Yet the allure isn't just about discovery, it's about the stories these lost chambers guard. The Oracle of the Dead wasn't merely a fortune teller, it was a bridge between worlds, offering closure to grieving families or warnings from beyond. Imagine a weary soldier kneeling in the dark, hoping to hear his fallen brother absolve him of survivor's guilt. Or a merchant seeking a deceased father's counsel on a risky voyage. These weren't theatrical performances, but raw, intimate encounters with mortality. The Sibyl's cave, meanwhile, held geopolitical weight. When Rome's generals consulted her, they weren't just seeking predictions, they were outsourcing guilt for brutal decisions to divine authority. The question lingers, should every oracle be found? Some scholars argue that certain sites are powerful precisely because they exist in the imagination, their mystery intact. Unearthing them might demystify the very aura that made them sacred. Others counter that these chambers are cultural birthrights, their artifacts and inscriptions holding keys to understanding ancient grief, power, and hope. For now, the search continues, a dance between respect for the past and the irrepressible human drive to uncover what's hidden. Every scratch of a trowel, every pixel of a satellite image whispers the same hope, that somewhere beneath the weight of centuries, the stones still remember. The ancient world reserved its highest spiritual authority for women in a way that defied nearly every other societal norm, an irony as striking as it is overlooked. While kings and generals made decrees in daylight, the fate of nations often rested on the trembling lips of priestesses breathing sacred vapors in darkened chambers. The Pythia at Delphi, the Sibyls of Cumae, the prophetic women of Dodona, these weren't mere exceptions to male-dominated power structures. They were living contradictions, women who commanded fear and reverence from the very men who otherwise barred their gender from public life. What made them so indispensable? One clue lies in the ancient belief that women, as life-bringers, stood closer to the mysteries of creation. The same cultures that sidelined women in politics saw them as natural bridges between worlds, their bodies cyclical like the moon, capable of bearing life, echoing the rhythms of nature that oracles sought to interpret. Yet biology alone doesn't explain the phenomenon. The rituals themselves reveal a deeper layer. At Delphi, the Pythia's trance state mirrored the physicality of childbirth, labored breathing, cries, even the way attendants supported her as she thrashed. This wasn't just ceremony, it was a reenactment of the ultimate creative act, a performance of sacred agony that male priests could only witness, never embody. Meanwhile, at Dodona, the Seloi priests, men who slept on the ground to hear Zeus in the rustling leaves, relied on 3 elderly priestesses to translate nature's whispers into coherent prophecy. The division was telling. Raw divine energy might be genderless, but its interpretation was women's work. But privilege came at a price. Oracle priestesses lived in gilded cages, revered yet restricted. The Pythia, once chosen, could never marry or return to ordinary life. The Sibyl of Cumae, according to legend, begged Apollo for immortality but forgot to ask for eternal youth, withering into a voice without a body. Even their authority was carefully contained. Male priests controlled access to them, framed their utterances, and decided which prophecies entered the historical record. This duality, exalted yet controlled, mirrored the broader paradox of women in antiquity, necessary to sustain society's spiritual life, yet denied a seat at its political table. The most provocative theory, though, lies in the psychology of secrecy. In cultures where women were barred from formal education, their perceived otherness made them ideal vessels for the divine. A man delivering prophecy might be seen as ambitious. A woman, by contrast, was a blank slate, her words untarnished by personal agenda. This bias ironically granted female oracles a unique form of power. When the Pythia warned Sparta against war, her gender lent her words an air of purity, as if the gods themselves spoke through her untainted lips. Modern excavations underscore this tension. At the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, archaeologists found lead tablets where women, barred from direct consultation, scribbled questions to be relayed by priestesses. In Anatolia, clay figurines depict oracle women with exaggerated lips and hands, symbols of their sacred speech. These artifacts whisper a truth louder than any prophecy. In societies that silenced women's everyday voices, the divine provided a loophole, a way for the marginalized to speak with unparalleled authority. The oracle chambers weren't just spaces of prophecy, they were the rare places where antiquity's quietest voices could thunder. Natural forces didn't just surround oracle chambers, they animated them, transforming ordinary landscapes into theaters of the supernatural. At Delphi, the same tectonic forces that carved Greece's mountains split the earth beneath Apollo's temple, releasing vapors that sent the Pythia into divine frenzy. But this wasn't unique to Greece. In Turkey's Hierapolis, priests led seekers through clouds of carbon dioxide rising from thermal springs, a gas so dense it could suffocate animals, yet in controlled doses it induced trances. The boiling pools weren't just backdrops, they were proof the gods were present, their power visible in the steam curling toward the sky. Ancient accounts describe how priests would test the air with torches. If the flames snuffed out, the gods were breathing too close for mortals to approach. This wasn't superstition, it was early environmental science, a way to harness nature's danger without being consumed by it. Equally deliberate were the acoustic marvels of these sites. In the Oracle of Trophonius, seekers descended into a cavern where underground rivers amplified every whisper into a roar, their voices bouncing off walls like spectral echoes. The priests knew something modern physics confirms. Sound waves travel differently in confined spaces, bending perception. A sigh could sound like a groan, a footstep like a thunderclap. At Baiae in Italy, the Cumaean Sibyl's cave was carved to resonate at specific frequencies, so her prophecies seemed to come from the walls themselves. These weren't happy accidents, they were engineered illusions, leveraging geology to make the intangible feel alive. But the most profound connection lay in celestial alignment. The temple of Ammon at Siwa was positioned so the rising sun on the winter solstice shot a beam of light directly down its central corridor, illuminating the god's statue in a blaze of gold. For Egyptians, this wasn't just symbolism, it was matte cosmic order made visible. Similarly, Delphi's rituals synchronized with the Pythian games, held every 4 years when the Pleiades constellation appeared brightest. The message was clear: prophecy wasn't separate from nature's rhythms, it was an extension of them. What's striking is how these cultures interpreted geological activity. Earthquakes weren't disasters but messages. Apollo shaking his arrows at Delphi. Volcanic gases weren't hazards but the breath of deities. Even the methane fires of modern Azerbaijan's Yanadag find echoes in ancient Persian oracles who read flames as Zoroaster's voice. This worldview reveals a radical truth. The ancients didn't worship nature alongside the gods. They saw no distinction between the two. The earth wasn't a setting for divinity. It was divine, its tremors and vapors as sacred as any scripture. Today, we'd call these places energy vortexes or ley lines, but the impulse remains the same. Whether standing in Delphi's ruins or feeling awe at Yellowstone's geysers, we're still chasing that primal thrill, the sense that the ground beneath our feet might speak if we listen closely enough. The oracle chambers didn't just use nature, they whispered back to it, a conversation written in gas and stone that's been ongoing since the first human looked at a crack in the earth and wondered, who's on the other side? The path to prophecy was never a straight line. It twisted through layers of ritual, each step designed to strip away the ordinary and open the mind to the extraordinary. Before a pilgrim could stand before the Pythia at Delphi, they had to bathe in the icy waters of the Castalian spring, the shock of cold purifying not just the body but the intentions. Sacrifices weren't mere transactions, they were psychological thresholds. A farmer offering his finest lamb wasn't just buying divine favor, he was proving his desperation, his willingness to give up something precious for answers. Even the journey itself was part of the transformation. Imagine walking for days along the sacred way, passing inscriptions like "Know Thyself" carved into temple walls, each step amplifying the weight of the question you carried. By the time you reached the inner sanctum, your mind wasn't just ready for revelation, It was starving for it. Nowhere were these rituals more extreme than at the Oracle of Trophonius. Seekers didn't simply ask questions, they endured a psychological gauntlet. After days of fasting and isolation, they'd descend a ladder into a pitch-black pit, their hands gripping the walls as the sounds of rushing water grew louder. Ancient accounts describe a moment where the ground seemed to swallow them whole, pulling them into a subterranean current. The terror wasn't incidental, it was the point. In that state of primal fear, the mind becomes hyper-receptive, blurring the line between hallucination and vision. When they emerged, shaking and often speechless, priests would interpret their fragmented words, not despite the trauma, but because of it. The ritual wasn't just preparation, it was the first act of prophecy itself. But why such elaborate theater? Modern psychology offers a clue. Rituals create what scientists call liminal space, a mental threshold where normal rules dissolve. The repetitive actions, the sensory deprivation, even the physical exhaustion all serve to quiet the analytical mind, making way for intuitive leaps. The priests of Dodona understood this instinctively. Before consulting Zeus' sacred oak, seekers had to sleep in a chamber where the wind rattled bronze vessels all night, the cacophony preventing deep rest. By dawn, their frazzled minds were primed to hear divine meaning in the rustling leaves. It's no coincidence that cultures separated by continents, from the sweat lodges of Maya shamans to the fasting vigils of Tibetan oracles, all used similar techniques to induce this state. The body must be unsettled for the mind to see beyond the obvious. The most revealing rituals, though, were the ones that inverted power. At the Oracle of Ammon in Siwa, even kings had to prostrate themselves before the god's sacred boat, their faces pressed to the floor as the priests interpreted its sway. This wasn't just humility theater, it was a recalibration of hierarchy. In that moment, the pharaoh was no longer a ruler. He was a supplicant, equal to the poorest farmer in his need for guidance. The ritual erased status, creating a space where only the question mattered. Similarly, at Delphi, the Pythia's chamber was designed so every visitor, regardless of rank, had to look up at her, a woman, as she channeled Apollo. These weren't arbitrary details, they were psychological leveling devices, ensuring seekers arrived not with demands, but with openness. What's haunting is how these ancient practices mirror modern therapeutic techniques. The isolation resembles sensory deprivation tanks used to treat anxiety. The fasting echoes the clarity reported by intermittent fasters. Even the terror of Trophonius cave finds its parallel in exposure therapy. The priests may not have had clinical terms, but they grasped a fundamental truth. Revelation isn't given, it's uncovered, often in the rubble of shattered expectations. The rituals weren't barriers to truth, they were the chisels that cracked the shell of ordinary perception, letting the light in. The moment Oedipus heard the prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother, his fate was sealed, not by the gods, but by the very human impulse to outrun destiny. Homer's epics and Virgil's verses didn't just record ancient beliefs about oracles, they sculpted them, turning cryptic pronouncements into narrative cornerstones. Take Cassandra, the Trojan princess blessed with foresight but cursed to never be believed. Her agonized warnings, dismissed as madness, became the ultimate literary metaphor for the fragility of truth. These stories weren't mere entertainment, they were cautionary tales about the peril of misinterpreting the divine, a theme as old as prophecy itself. Virgil's Aeneid takes this further, weaving the Sibyl of Cumae into the hero's journey like a golden thread. When Aeneas descends into the underworld, guided by her flickering torch, her prophecies aren't just directions, they're psychological milestones. Her cave, with its 100 mouths and echoing whispers, becomes a physical manifestation of fate's labyrinth. What's striking is how Virgil mirrors real oracle rituals, the Sibyl's frenzied state, the sacrificial rites, even the way her words blur the line between revelation and riddles. This wasn't poetic license, it was world-building, grounding myth in the visceral reality of ancient divination practices. But literature didn't just reflect oracle culture, it amplified it. The tragedies performed in Athenian theaters like Oedipus Rex transformed Delphi's ambiguities into dramatic fuel. When the Pythia's words unravel Oedipus's life, the audience isn't just watching a king fall, they're confronting the terrifying power of language itself. A single phrase, misread or twisted, could destroy a dynasty. Playwrights like Sophocles understood something profound. Prophecies thrive in the gap between what's said and what's heard. The same ambiguity that made oracles indispensable in politics made them irresistible in storytelling. Yet the most subversive twist lies in how these texts interrogated the oracle's authority. In the Bacchae, Euripides paints the prophet Tyges as both wise and foolish, his visions muddled by mortal bias. Even Homer's Odysseus, ever the skeptic, tests the spirits he summons in the underworld, demanding proofs of their knowledge. These layers, reverence undercut by doubt, reveal a tension at the heart of ancient belief. Oracles were sacred, but their human intermediaries fallible. Literature became the space where societies could wrestle with that paradox, safe within the realm of fiction. The legacy of these narratives stretches far beyond antiquity. Shakespeare's witches in Macbeth, Tolkien's Palantirs, even the dystopian precogs of Minority Report, all are heirs to the literary oracle, their prophecies driving plots and peeling back human nature. What began in smoky temple chambers now lives in pixels and paper, a testament to storytelling's oldest rule: we'll always crave someone or something to whisper what comes next. And perhaps that's the most enduring prophecy of all. The marble columns of Delphi didn't rise from divine intervention. They were built on a steady stream of silver and gold, offerings from kings and commoners alike who believed the future was worth paying for. A single prophecy could cost as much as a farmer's annual harvest, with additional fees for purification rituals, sacrificial animals, and even priority access for wealthy patrons. The temple's treasuries overflowed with gifts, statues melted down from war spoils, ingots from distant mines, even entire ships dedicated to Apollo. This wasn't just devotion, it was an economy, one where spiritual currency and real wealth flowed in lockstep. Pilgrims didn't merely visit Delphi, they fueled it, their desperation and ambition bankrolling everything from grand colonnades to the priest's lavish robes. But the real financial genius lay in Delphi's monopoly on uncertainty. By controlling access to the Pythia, the temple effectively held a patent on divine guidance. Cities paid fortunes for foundation oracles to legitimize new colonies, knowing settlers would flock to lands blessed by Apollo. Merchants consulted the oracle before voyages, their donations ensuring favorable winds, or at least the perception of them. Even military campaigns hinged on Delphi's endorsements, with generals like Lysander of Sparta reportedly bribing priests to sway prophecies toward war. The temple's wealth became so vast it functioned as an ancient bank, loaning funds to city-states at interest and amassing holdings that stretched across Greece. Rome took this model and scaled it to imperial proportions. The Sibylline books weren't kept in a dusty archive, but in a vault beneath the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, guarded like nuclear codes. Consulting them required Senate approval and a state-funded sacrifice, turning prophecy into a bureaucratic transaction. When fires or plagues struck, the Senate didn't just pray, they allocated budgets for Sibylline consultations, knowing the political value of divine cover for unpopular policies. The books themselves were commodities, allegedly purchased from the Cumean Sibyl for a king's ransom in gold, their verses treated as intellectual property more sacred than any copyright. Yet the tension between commerce and sanctity was unavoidable. At Dodona, archaeologists found lead tablets where pilgrims complained about fake oracles, peddling vague phrases for quick coin. In Egypt, the Oracle of Ammon faced scandals when priests were caught auctioning favorable prophecies to rival pharaohs. Even Delphi's reputation suffered when historians like Strabo noted how its prophecies grew suspiciously aligned with donor interests during the Persian Wars. This duality, holy site versus prophet center, mirrors modern struggles between faith and commercialization, from televangelists to wellness influencers. What's fascinating is how these chambers balanced spiritual integrity with financial pragmatism. The Pythia never handled money herself. Priests acted as intermediaries, preserving her aura of detachment. Offerings were framed as acts of piety, not payments, with inscriptions emphasizing gratitude over transaction. And when greed threatened to corrupt, the system had self-correcting mechanisms. Disgruntled pilgrims could appeal to the Amphictyonic Council, Delphi's governing body, which occasionally refunded donations for unsatisfactory prophecies. The ultimate lesson: oracle chambers were the ancient world's first subscription services, offering something no marketplace could replicate: the illusion of control over chaos. Whether a bronze figurine tossed into a sacred spring or a senator's gold for the Sibyl's verses, the price of certainty hasn't changed in millennia. We still pay it, just in different currencies. History remembers the wooden walls prophecy not as a triumph of divine guidance, but as a near-catastrophic lesson in the perils of selective hearing. When the Persian army descended on Athens in 480 BCE, the terrified citizens turned to Delphi, clinging to Apollo's words like a lifeline. The Pythia's response, trust in wooden walls, seemed clear to traditionalists: barricade the Acropolis with timber defenses. But Themistocles, a naval strategist with a gift for creative interpretation, saw something else entirely. To him, wooden walls meant ships, the fleet that could outmaneuver Persia's overwhelming numbers. The debate that followed split Athens down the middle, with one faction digging in for a doomed last stand while the other evacuated to Salamis. What saved them wasn't blind obedience to the oracle, but the willingness to question its meaning, to recognize that prophecies, like mirrors, reflect the biases of those who interpret them. The darker side of divination emerges in the twisted reign of Nero, who turned Delphi into a propaganda machine. Desperate to legitimize his matricide and the burning of Rome, the Emperor Strong armed the Pythia into declaring him favored by Apollo. Coins minted during his rule show Nero crowned by the oracle herself, a grotesque parody of divine sanction. But the priests of Delphi weren't passive victims. They fought back with the only weapon they had: ambiguity. Their prophecies to Nero grew increasingly ominous, warning of the number 73, in what historians believe was a coded reference to Galba, the 73-year-old general who would eventually overthrow him. This dangerous dance reveals oracles as battlegrounds where power and truth collided, their pronouncements both swords and shields in the hands of those who knew how to wield them. Perhaps the most tragic misuse of prophecy unfolded in Jerusalem during the Roman siege. The Jewish historian Josephus records how rebel leaders, trapped within the city's walls, seized on an ancient oracle predicting a messianic deliverer would arise from their midst. Ignoring warnings that the prophecy referred to a future era, they rallied the starving populace to fight on, interpreting every setback as a divine test. The result, a slaughter so brutal even the Romans were appalled, with the temple itself reduced to smoldering ruins. This wasn't just misreading the gods, It was weaponizing hope against reason, turning faith into a death warrant. What these stories share isn't the failure of prophecy, but the frailty of human judgment. The Pythia never promised certainty. She offered riddles that demanded wisdom to unravel. When societies replaced critical thought with blind fervor, treating oracles as infallible rather than interpretive, disaster followed. Modern parallels abound, from stock market bubbles fueled by "can't lose" predictions to political movements that twist vague slogans into absolute truth. The real lesson of these controversies isn't that divination is dangerous, but that certainty is, especially when it wears the mask of divine command. The ancient world understood this better than we sometimes do today. Prophecies were never meant to replace thinking. They were invitations to think harder. The hunger to peer beyond life's curtain hasn't faded. It's simply traded laurel wreaths for LED screens and sacred springs for smartphone apps. Walk through any modern spiritual marketplace, and you'll find Delphi's echo everywhere. TikTok tarot readers shuffling digital decks, YouTube psychics channeling messages through comment sections, even AI-powered astrology apps that generate personalized prophecies with algorithmic precision. At first glance, this might seem like ancient traditions diluted for the attention economy, but dig deeper and you'll discover something far more fascinating: a genuine revival of oracle practices, adapted for a world that craves mystery as much as ever, even if it comes with a Wi-Fi connection. Consider the neo-pagan communities gathering in forest clearings to recreate Dodona's oak rituals, interpreting bird calls and wind patterns as their ancestors once did. Or the luxury retreats in Sedona and Bali where seekers pay thousands to sit in replica oracle chambers, breathing herbal vapors under the guidance of modern-day sibyls. These aren't just cosplay, they're attempts to reconstruct the sensory experience of ancient divination, recognizing that prophecy was never just about words. It was about the smell of incense, the weight of anticipation, the way torchlight flickered on temple walls. The tools have evolved: crystal grids instead of animal bones, sound baths instead of bronze vessels, but the core remains unchanged, creating conditions where the mind can slip its ordinary bounds. Yet the most striking evolution is happening online. Digital tarot platforms now use machine learning to analyze user questions, cross-referencing them with centuries of symbolic interpretations to generate eerily relevant readings. Meditation apps employ binaural beats to simulate the trance states of the Pythia, guiding users into theta brainwaves where intuition overrides logic. Even social media has become an oracle chamber of sorts, with algorithms serving up signs and synchronicities tailored to individual feeds. The irony is delicious. The same technology accused of fragmenting attention also offering portals to the numinous, proving that divinity and data aren't mutually exclusive. Critics dismiss this as spiritual consumerism, and not without reason. The commodification of ancient rituals, $200 oracle consultations via Zoom, mass-produced rune sets with watered-down guidebooks risks reducing sacred traditions to aesthetic trends. But history offers a counterpoint. Delphi itself was big business, its priests negotiating political alliances as shrewdly as any modern influencer. The tension between authenticity and accessibility isn't new. It's woven into the very fabric of divination. What matters isn't the medium, but the sincerity of the seeking. Beneath the crystals and hashtags lies a profound cultural shift. In an age of climate crises and algorithmic determinism, the resurgence of oracle practices speaks to a collective longing to reclaim agency, to believe that fate isn't just dictated by carbon emissions or lines of code, but can still be shaped by symbols, choices, and the occasional whispered hint from the universe. The vessels have changed, but the wine remains the same, a vintage brewed from humanity's oldest question, the one that echoed in Delphi's corridors and now hums in charging ports and meditation pods alike. What's coming next? And perhaps more importantly, can I change it? Even after centuries of excavation and analysis, the oracle chambers of the ancient world guard their most tantalizing secrets with the same stubborn silence as the Sibyl herself. How did generations of priests and priestesses maintain such uncanny consistency in their prophecies, despite the chaos of wars, famines, and cultural shifts? At Delphi, archaeologists have uncovered training manuals, fragmented clay tablets detailing decades of ritual phrasing and symbolic interpretations, suggesting an elaborate system of knowledge transfer. But this only scratches the surface. The Sibylline books, those infamous collections of lost prophecies, present an even greater enigma. Legend claims they contained precise predictions of events centuries ahead, from the rise of Rome to the coming of a pale stranger across the sea. Yet what survives today are fragments, charred scraps rescued from fires, their cryptic verses debated like ancient Sudoku puzzles. Then there are the eerie coincidences that defy easy dismissal. The Pythia's warning to Athens about a wooden wall proved startlingly accurate when Themistocles' fleet triumphed at Salamis. The oracle of Ammon correctly named Alexander as Zeus' son years before his conquest of Egypt. Were these strokes of luck, or did the oracles possess access to something beyond our modern understanding? Perhaps an early form of intelligence network, where priests compiled reports from travelers and merchants into a rudimentary global forecast. The temple complex at Claros hints at this possibility, with its vast archive of weather patterns and trade routes painstakingly recorded over centuries. But the greatest mystery may still lie buried. In 2008, researchers using ground-penetrating radar beneath the ruins of Cumae detected anomalies matching descriptions of the Sibyl's hidden vault, a chamber supposedly lined with shelves of prophetic scrolls. Yet excavation permits remain tangled in bureaucratic red tape, leaving the question unanswered. Could intact prophecies still survive in airtight clay jars, waiting to rewrite our understanding of antiquity? Even more tantalizing are the whispers from smaller, overlooked sites. A farmer in Epirus recently uncovered a lead tablet near the Akron River, its inscription referencing a second oracle of the dead, with directions too corroded to follow. What keeps historians awake at night isn't just the gaps in our knowledge, it's the unsettling possibility that the ancients mastered something we've forgotten. The way the Pythia's chamber at Delphi aligns with seismic fault lines, harnessing geological forces we're only now beginning to measure. The acoustic properties of Dodona's bronze vessels, which modern engineers admit could produce infrasound frequencies known to alter consciousness. These aren't just curiosities, they're breadcrumbs leading to a startling idea that oracle chambers may have been sophisticated technology disguised as mysticism. The flame of curiosity burns brightest where shadows linger. Every cracked tablet deciphered, every subsurface scan performed, brings us closer to truths that could reshape history. Yet some secrets resist revelation, clinging to the darkness like the last wisps of smoke from a sacred fire. Perhaps that's how it should be. The moment we stop questioning is the moment the oracles truly fall silent. From the whispering chambers of Delphi to the sacred groves of Dodona, these ancient oracle chambers were never just stone and shadow, they were living, breathing reflections of humanity's eternal dance with the unknown. Think about it, when a Greek general knelt before the Pythia or an Egyptian pharaoh awaited Ammon's verdict, they weren't just seeking answers, they were confronting the same restless questions that keep us awake at night, questions about power, love, survival, and the fragile threads that bind us to fate. The brilliance of these spaces wasn't in their ability to predict tomorrow, but in their uncanny knack for giving voice to the unspoken anxieties of their age. And here's the haunting part: we're still building them today. Look around. Our modern world is littered with digital oracle chambers, algorithmic horoscopes, AI-generated forecasts, even the eerie precision of weather apps that promise to tell us whether to carry an umbrella or a life jacket. The mediums have changed, but the magic remains the same. We still crave that fleeting illusion of control, that whisper from the void telling us we're not alone in the chaos. The ancient priests of Dodona would nod in recognition at our obsession with data analytics, our worship of predictive models that promise to decode the stock market or the next viral trend. Turns out, humanity never outgrew its need for sacred intermediaries. We just swapped laurel leaves for line graphs. Yet there's a profound beauty in this continuity. The oracles of old understood something we often forget. Prophecy was never about locking the future in stone. It was about opening doors in the mind. When the Pythia told Croesus his empire would fall, she wasn't handing down a sentence, she was holding up a mirror to his own recklessness. The real power of these chambers lay in their ambiguity, their refusal to offer easy answers. They forced seekers to wrestle with uncertainty, to confront the uncomfortable truth that destiny isn't a scroll to be unrolled, but a conversation, one we're all invited to join. So what's left for us standing among the ruins of these ancient sanctuaries? Maybe it's this: the courage to embrace the unknown without demanding it speak in perfect verses. To recognize that every algorithm, every tarot card, every whispered prayer is just another iteration of that primal urge to reach beyond the visible and touch something greater. The oracles may have fallen silent, but their legacy hums in every choice we make, every crossroads where we pause and wonder, what if this journey through history's echoes has sparked your curiosity? Don't let it end here. Tap that like button if you're as fascinated by these mysteries as we are. Subscribe to keep unraveling the past's hidden threads, and drop a comment below. What ancient prophecy would you dare to seek, given the chance? After all, the story's not over. It's just waiting for the next